right. So we've been live on TalkShoe for a few minutes. We're about to go live on Restream, but we talked about the top 3 corners, Travis Hunter. We talked about Will Johnson, and we talked about Benjamin Morrison on TalkShoe. I have Hunter at 1 on my big board. This is based on what I think NFL teams are going to do. I've got Hunter at 1, Johnson at 3, and I've got Benjamin Morrison at 6. To be fair, I've got those 3 guys all in the top 6 on my big board. And that's not a knock on anyone else in the class. Benjamin Morrison is tied with McMillan and Burden for 4 and 5, and McMillan had 1,000 yards. I think Burden's been more durable than Morrison, and I would argue that both of those receivers are ahead of Morrison right now if we take durability into account, Joey. But I have the exact same floor and ceiling grade on McMillan, Burden, and Morrison, and both Burden and McMillan have been better, and receivers get hyped up all the time, so that bumps Morrison down to 6 since he missed 7 games. And that's fair. It's harsh, but that's a fair evaluation with Morrison.
It is a fair evaluation, and like Alan, McMillan's growing on me, and he's moving up, and I think McMillan will move up more on my board depending on what he does going forward, because we're in the nitty-gritty of the college football season, guys. Let's not forget about that. We're in the nitty-gritty.
But all of McMillan's signature games came against weak teams with cornerbacks. I think he had like 2 receptions for 12 yards against Travis Hunter when Arizona played Colorado earlier in the year. But to be fair, he exceeded 1,000 yards. He had 7 touchdowns, and he's got the size that NFL teams covet, but he's projected to run a 4.5. Burden's projected to run a 4.4, but he's 5'11".
And let's give Hunter some credit for that, because Hunter is, depending on where you put him, a top 3 corner in this class. So, let's give him a little credit, that, he was against, a top talent with great instincts. We're going to give Travis Hunter that. He has great instincts for the ball, whether it's as a receiver or...
The thing is, back in the preseason, I gave Will Johnson and Benjamin Morrison an A+ in man, zone, and press coverage, and the only other corners I did that with were Stingley and Sauce Gardner in 22. And I try to be fair with I would probably give Hunter an A+ in man, an A in zone, and an A- in press, and that might be too lenient by Joey's standards, which how would you grade Hunter in man, zone, and press if you had to assign him a grade? Be honest with me.
And like when it comes to zone, you have to have a nose for the ball. You have to have a nose for your area. And he is probably the best corner in the nation at having just ball instincts. I mean, I've seen some plays he's made when I watched a couple of those games where he just came out of nowhere, knowing exactly where he was, exactly where the ball was, exactly how this was going. And he made a play that would boggle the mind. So I would probably give him an A+ in zone. In man, I'd probably give him a B+, somewhere around there, because he definitely athletic enough to keep up with people. Can definitely get his hand up. But when it comes to fundamentals of man coverage, he has some stuff to learn.
So basically, Hunter has the floor of a B corner in man coverage, but the ceiling of an A+ if you fix his flaws. He's a pretty safe A+ corner, A corner with A+ ceiling and zone. So what's the floor for his press coverage if I had an A- for press?
He does not press well.
Sounds like you want to give him a B- or a C- depending the circumstance or the situation.
He doesn't have the body for press. That's his problem. He gets up there. He has the fundamentals for press, but he can easily get taken out of the play by a bigger receiver.
If he has the fundamentals but not the body, that sounds more like a B- than a C- because of his talent level, because of his skill set.
Yeah. I would say he needs to get into an NFL weight room and see and try to add some muscle.
And look,
Right now,
having bad press coverage is not a deal breaker if you know the cover 0, cover 1, cover 2, cover 3, cover 4 coverage shells. And
you can work with that, especially once you get into an NFL training camp and get into an NFL where you can fix these issues. Then you can really say, okay, we got this. And it doesn't become an issue. But as far as the draft situation goes, yes, they're going to draft on potential.
And Hunter, here's the thing. If New England takes Hunter, he'll probably be the flanker receiver as a rookie, but he'll also be the boundary corner because they have Christian Gonzalez. He's going to be the number 1 corner as long as he's on the Patriots. Elliott Wolf even hinted he's one of the 4 untouchables. So if that's the case, Hunter's going to be the boundary. He's going to be covering number 2 receivers, which I actually think is better for him from a fit standpoint if he goes to a man-heavy team like New England. If he goes to a zone-heavy team like the Chargers or the Bills, I think he can be a good number 1 corner, but he's got to go to that zone-heavy team. The Patriots are man-heavy, so I think if he goes to a man team, he can be a good number 2 corner, but that's his ceiling and that's his fit. If you put him on a man team like the Browns or the Patriots and you expect to be the number 1 corner, you're not going to have a good time.
I would rather him guard his rookie year, Cedric Tillman, than freaking Allen from the Buccaneers. I mean,
Mike Evans, you mean? But yeah.
What did I say?
Allen.
My bad. But yeah, you know. really cut into that?
Yeah. So it's like we're both being microphone hogs. William can mediate everything. It works out. All right, William, I'm so freaking glad you're here, man. Sorry about the technical issues on Restream's end, but we've broke down 8 corners so far. We broke down Travis Hunter. We broke down Will Johnson, Michigan. We broke down Morrison, Notre Dame. I have those 3 in the top 6, and then I have Quincy Riley at 23 on my board. And I also have those are my 5 round 1 guys. And then I have Rebel, East Carolina at 33, could be 34. And then I also have Maxwell Hairston at 38 and Muhammad at 39. And when you factor in Tumaloa moving down to round 2, those guys bump down to 39 and 40. So that's 8 corners in the top 40, Joey. But William, what are your thoughts on the 8 corners in the top 40 Joey and I broke down so far?
Oh, I don't have a whole lot of thoughts on that. I just got here and I hadn't seen a whole lot, but I'm sure you went really in depth with it, so we'll go with that.
Simple and to the point. I respect that. All right. Number 50. No, please no. Please no, Joey. You're being a jerk to Denzel Burke. You're hurting Ryan Day's feelings. Now, in your defense, Joey, Ryan Day kind of deserves it. Ryan Day kind of deserves it. I mean, at least Ohio State soccer team tried to beat Marshall. They failed because of a big mistake, which I'll get to later, but at least Ohio State soccer tried. At least they got to carry North Carolina. Is Ryan Day going to get to a neutral site bowl game against Tennessee? We'll see. But Dylan Sampson matches up well against Ohio State. But we're going to get to Denzel Burke. Your stories are going to hurt Denzel Burke's feelings. I have Denzel Burke at 53 on the board.
Sampson's way up there in my fantasy draft, man.
Remember, Denzel Burke was your number 1 corner at this time a year ago, Joey. This time last year, Denzel Burke was your number 1 corner for the 24 cycle.
I respect that.
I do too, but I think he's a guy with a floor of a nickel and the ceiling of a number 1, and that sort of.
I really think he off. I don't think
yeah.
And that's the problem, because all these corners that are jumping and amazing corner,
but he hasn't taken the leap yet.
Yeah, he hasn't gotten better and he hasn't gotten worse.
And there's a lot of people that are saying Burke's a round 3 corner. Rabble. No draft Twitter. Do not behave like the citizens of South Park. Do not behave like the citizens of South Park during a riot. Denzel Burke is not a 3rd round corner. He's a 2nd round corner who got overhyped as a 1st round corner, and he hasn't lived up to the hype of a 1st round corner, but he's still good. I have him at 53 on my board. I think that's a more realistic evaluation, Joey.
That hype is killer.
I don't think he's met his ceiling,
but a lot of other sites are much lower on him than we are. I got him at 53, and a lot of other sites have him in the 70s, which I think is absolutely ludicrous. He's not in the 70s, guys. He's going to get picked in somewhere in round 2. He is. And he might get reached for in round 1 like Emmanuel Forbes a few years ago. The Commanders took Forbes.
I don't think he reached. I think that Burke has only reached his ceiling as a college corner because the coaches can't elevate him.
So you're saying Burke is a victim of Ryan Day's shenanigans. Victim of Ryan Day's shenanigans.
Quick and to the point.
I said it was Sawyer that he is a victim of that coaching staff, and I said the same thing here. That defensive coaching staff is not going to get you to the next level of where your talent needs to be.
I have Jordan Hancock Jordan Hancock as the 10th and final corner in my rankings for round 2. What do you have to say about Burke's teammate Hancock, Jordan Hancock? Because he started the year out as the boundary. He moved to the nickel. I still like him as a round 2 corner, but he might get pushed down to round 3. It just depends on who's ranked ahead of him. But I have him at like 62 or 63. So that's like a fringe. That's a 3rd round grade by NFL standards, Joey. If you're 62 or 63 on the board, you might be projected as a second rounder, but that's an early third round grade.
William, what do you think about this? Because you probably have more about.
I don't have a lot of insight into it. Talk about coaching staffs. That's usually where I go with what is happening with a player. I mean, if they have something solid, then okay. But you mentioned Ohio State. It's like, well, why did Caleb Downs go there? I mean, it's like there's a lot of things there.
And it's not that Hancock's a liability, but the argument can be made he's the third best player on the secondary behind Downs and Burke, like you and William mentioned. At best, he's the third best player. If he's having an off day and Lathan Ransom's balling out, he's the fourth best player. And Ohio State's also got a freshman corner and a sophomore corner that are pushing him as far as reps go. So, he's one of those guys who's up in the air, but he's talented enough to be cornerback 10. But he's not running away with cornerback 10. But for now, he's my cornerback 10, barely rounding out round 2.
And we'll get into this next week, but I think Lathan Ransom's another victim of this because I think he has so much raw talent.
Ohio State soccer coach went from 1 win in his first year to a Final Four appearance and the number 1 seed this year. I actually think Ohio State soccer coach could do a better job coaching the football team than Ryan Day, as stupid as that sounds.
Ryan Day.
Here we go.
He's a very good offensive coordinator. But the bottom line is, I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Not every coordinator is a great head coach.
Yeah.
And I think that's where Ryan Day is. He is a great offensive coordinator. He may even be a professional level offensive coordinator.
We only have 2 corners that made the third round, and both of them are guys with floors of nickels, but ceilings of number 1 corners. They got ceilings of number 1 corners, but they have floors of nickels. And some of these corners are raw enough to where they might start out in a dime roll as a rookie and get eased into things. And the 2 corners I'm talking about are Wisconsin's Ricardo Hallman and Kansas's Kobe Bryant. And Hallman I have at 76. I have Bryant at 91. But I want to talk about Hallman for a second because Hallman's a guy that was on my radar very early in the process. We had a preseason second round grade on him, but his worst game of the year was against Alabama, which was the most televised game Wisconsin had all season. And when you have your worst game of the year in the game that's the most televised game, that kills your draft stock in a sense. It's not a death sentence to your draft stock, but you move down a round and you have to prove yourself in the pre-draft process. Otherwise, you're going to risk falling further. So if he has a bad Senior Bowl, bad combine, we're looking at Hallman dropping to day 3. Even though he has the upside to develop into a Pro Bowl corner. He's like the Rosengarten of corners this year because Rosengarten sucked against Michigan, but he did everything else right in the pre-draft process. So that's basically what Hallman's going to have to do if he wants to creep into the second round. He's going to have a perfect Senior Bowl, perfect combine, perfect pro day like Rosengarten. That's really the only way he can sneak into round 2, Joey, with how deep this cornerback class is. Don't you agree?
Yeah, I got a question for you because I've said it for a couple of years now. I don't think anybody remembers the last thing you put.
I've got a question that's simple and to the point that William can answer. Did anybody on Wisconsin's secondary have an answer for Jalen Milroe? Let's try that. That's short and to the point, and that's a question William can answer in spades. Even if he's high or chooses to drink alcohol or chooses to chew tobacco outside. I'm not judging you. You do you, man. But it's like, yeah. I think that's a question you are perfectly capable of answering with all the film you've done on Milroe. Did anybody on Wisconsin secondary have an answer for Milroe? Yes or no? Give me your thoughts.
Not a lot I have because when he is not doing well against the secondary, he's doing well on his feet.
I thought Hunter
And
Wohler had the best game against Alabama on Wisconsin secondary, but Milroe used his football IQ to avoid him. He was actually alert enough in that game to where he avoided Wohler the entire contest. And he basically picked on all the corners. Hallman wasn't bad, but Milroe wasn't targeting Hallman or Wohler. He was targeting the other less experienced corners on Wisconsin, and they just had zero answer for Ryan Williams, zero answer for Alabama's offense. And Milroe just had a field day with those backup corners on Wisconsin, those younger, less experienced corners. I mean, what am I missing? I feel like we covered everything there. You got anything you want to add to that?
yeah. Milroe, like I said, he is what he is, and when you're having a bad day, he can respond, and whether that is the coaching staff that is there with Kalen DeBauer or whoever is there.
In that game, but he wasn't as good as Hunter Wohler, and Alabama routed Wisconsin to the point where I had to move Hallman down from round 2 to round 3. And there's a lot of people that have Hallman in day 3. And if he has a bad Senior Bowl, bad combine, he risks falling to day 3, even though he's got the ceiling to develop into a number 1 corner. If you watch his 2023 tape, his 2024 tape's not as good. But next up, we have Kobe Bryant, the Kansas corner. The Jayhawks corner came in at 91 in my rankings. And, Kansas upset Colorado a few weeks ago.
I was skeptical of him, not for any reason he did, but because anybody who has the name Kobe Bryant or any sports fan out there.
Well, this is Kobe with a C. This is Kobe with a C, and there's Kobe with a K. Kobe with a K is the NBA guy, and there's 2 Kobe Bryants. There's the Kobe Bryant on the Seahawks with the Y, and there's the Kobe Bryant on Kansas with the 2 E's. So there's different branches of Kobe Bryant. There's different branches. And it's created this inception of fuckery that Joey just can't stand. It's an inception of fuckery, and you can't stand it.
You got to go with the name thing, man. The name thing.
I stand him completely from everything and watch this guy play to say, he's pretty good and he can be a good pro. And, he's pretty good in man coverage.
Sounds like a 3rd-round pick.
And Kobe Bryant, greatness. I don't care what sport you're in. If you're named Kobe Bryant, you're expecting a level, and you have to separate the Lakers legend, a top 5 all-time basketball player, from everybody else named Kobe Bryant. And that is for somebody, integrated into that, and who's a fan. That can be difficult, and it was difficult for me to do. But I really do like Kobe Bryant, the Kansas corner. The Kansas corner. Kobe Bryant. I really like him. I think he's got a ton of potential. I think we talked about earlier the Sam for the Browns, the four corner. I think he is very similar to that, but I think he's more skilled. Very similar game.
He's more skilled. His ceiling's higher. His floor is about where Cameron Mitchell's was, but his ceiling, I think, is slightly higher.
Yes.
Because I had a borderline starter grade on Mitchell for potential. With Bryant, I have a 90 for potential, but I'd say there's a 15%, maybe 10% chance he reaches that 90. You're probably looking at an 86 or 87 rating when he fills out his ceiling.
Slot corner.
I think he's got a potential that's higher than Mitchell.
I agree. We agree. We're in agreement on this.
But the skill set's pretty much the same, and I think they both start. When Mitchell starts, I think he's going to get a starting.
I do think he could be eased in like Mitchell, start out as a dime, but he's good enough to play nickel if an injury occurs, like Paulson Adebo or Alante Taylor. He could be the Alante Taylor of this class.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at, so thank you for that.
All right. Next up is Dorian Strong. This guy was a player I had a preseason second-round grade on, but his floor grade dropped from a 71 to a 61. He went from 8 deflections to 6. And just look at Virginia Tech. They are one of the teams that underachieved this year, William. Lost to Vanderbilt on the road, 34-27. They lost to Rutgers by a field goal. Dorian Strong's first deflection didn't come until the Miami game, and that was week 5. And then
Those are some
started to
pretty
get
good
into a
teams that you're
groove.
talking about right there, man.
Yeah, he got into a groove in
Some
that
pretty
game.
good young
He had a
teams.
deflection against Syracuse despite giving up 38 points.
Yeah.
He had a deflection against Aomayer and Stanford. He had a deflection against Duke, 21-38 loss. Duke had a quarterback that dominated this year, entered the portal, and Virginia and Stanford are the only teams that Virginia Tech's held to under 20 points on defense, but he still had 6 deflections, and he's still the best player on Virginia Tech's defense. I think he's I think Dorian Strong, even with the bad year, is still a draftable player, but he's a day 3 guy now because he got worse from his junior to senior year. And that's just where he's in. He's pigeonholed into that day 3. But if you're looking for a corner on day 3, a guy who's going to start out as a dime and could potentially develop into a number 1, probably going to be a number 3 or number 2, you're looking at Strong as an ideal nickel on day 3. Maybe he becomes a day 2. Maybe he becomes a number 2 or number 1 if he keeps improving, but he's got to have that immediate success. If he gets an opportunity to play, Joey, he's got to have an impact right out of the gate. Otherwise, he's going to have a very short career in the league.
I'm not a fan of Strong. He has done nothing to prove that he is league worthy. Let's face it, Travis Powell had a 4-year NFL career, bouncing from team to team. And he was a good player. He was a national champion. I see nothing.
But he was on a loaded Ohio State secondary. In Powell's defense.
But he was still a good enough player to...
Powell did not have the responsibilities of a number 1 corner covering number 1 receivers, and Strong has that. So that's my counter argument for Strong over Powell.
Yeah, but he still had NFL teams say, you're good enough to be on my roster.
Strong has that, but I also feel like he needs a year to learn the playbook, maybe 2.
Okay. Maybe this is why the United Federal Football League, or whatever they're calling themselves now, is a good thing, because maybe somebody like him, like Strong, can go in there and then go into the NFL. So that it may be
my final 4th round corner is Florida Gators corner Jason Marshall Jr. I have Marshall at 137 on my board. Marshall had 2.
Amazing potential.
I have a potential grade of 89 for Bill Marshall. My potential grade for Marshall is 89. That's 1 point shy of a Pro Bowl, but his floor is a 59. His floor is, he's a number 5, maybe a number 6 corner to start out as a rookie, and you have to develop him from the ground up every single step of the way.
Yeah, that's what I just said. It's like amazing ceiling, horrific floor. I mean, what do you think about that? You know, it's like such potential, but such potential.
Well, it sounds like there's a group of these players in this draft right here, you know, that have a really high ceiling, but, you know, a really low floor. And another player, you know, that did well, like Chris was mentioning, against some of these teams that maybe overachieved a bit. You know, Vanderbilt, you know, they had some wins, they had some really close losses.
Marshall dominated his first 2 years, but you go back to the opener last year against Utah, he got toasted in that game to the point where it just ruined his confidence. He got freaking roasted in that one by the backup to Cam Rising, I believe, a year ago. And he just hasn't been the same guy since. Still best corner, but that crippled his stock. Because before that, he was on pace to be a day 2, maybe a day 1 guy.
The fucking Nick Anderson of college football. I'm just a fucking free throw in a big game.
Oh man, there's your rating.
Yeah, at number 5, at my first round 5 corner is actually Dalen Everett. I gave Everett an 88 for potential, but I gave him a floor grade of 58. He only had 3 interceptions and 2 deflections, but I do want to take a look at the deflections and interceptions and then figure out what games he excelled in. He had a deflection against Alabama. He had a forced fumble against Kentucky in the close win. So he probably had really good cape against Dane Key early in the year. Because you remember those first 3 games, Georgia dominated those first 3 games defensively. His other deflection game against Texas in the SEC title. So Everett, even though he's got potential to be a number 2 corner, very inconsistent. But because of Georgia's success the last few years, it feels like he's been pigeonholed into day 2 due to the talent in this class. It feels like he's being pushed up for the sake of being pushed up.
Georgia's talent overall is amazing. And I'm going to throw it out there, and this is going to be an unpopular opinion. Their weakest link is their quarterback. Because, let's face it, if Beck went out of the game, Georgia was just as good as Beck in the game. When Beck came back in for that last play, his right arm was bang, everybody knew he was not going to throw the ball.
Carson Beck reminds me of the dickhead who made fun of Pinocchio's nose in the movie Pinocchio. That's who Carson Beck reminds me of. I'm sorry, Carson Beck, but that's the vibe you gave off when you smiled after the interceptions.
Go with the celebrity comparisons.
I'm not talking about the Disney movie Pinocchio. I'm talking about the real life Pinocchio movie that came out in the mid-90s. There was this guy that made fun of Pinocchio, and it was. I'll be honest. The real life version of Pinocchio sucked ass. It was just horrible. I cannot believe I enjoyed that as a kid. But let's get back to the cornerback rankings. I have Everett at the top of round 5 right now. I have Drew Aller at 139 on my board. I have him at late round 4 on Aller.
Sing about forever, because that is shameful that you enjoyed that as a child.
I had a really fucked up childhood. I did not start watching football until I'm 8. 8 was when I first started watching football, but I fell in love with it ever since. But I had a really fucked up childhood from ages 2 to 7.
William, how fucked up is that this is.
Are we doing a psychological evaluation here? I mean,
I feel like Joey wants to give me an intervention because I actually enjoyed some movies that sucked in the 90s, but we'll get
Pinocchio
to
sucked in the
Vaughn,
90s, bro.
Utah corner next. Amaya Vaughn, I have him in the...
When I was a kid, man, Pinocchio was just,
We're going to tell you why you're wrong.
That's fine, but I want to get to the next corner. Amaya Vaughn, Utah corner. 146 on my rankings. I have a 5th round grade on Vaughn. What have you seen from Zamaya Vaughn, William? You've watched a few Utah games. Is he worth a flyer in day 3?
Any player from Utah that might be on your board definitely is on day 3. Whittingham is a very tough coach, and he has some very tough players. And, going through there, just to play for that guy and stay there for a minute will definitely up your stock. And, yeah, definitely worth a flyer.
Vaughn started out as a safety and moved to corner. And my floor grade on him is a 57. Yeah.
I agree with Glenn. I love the coaching staff for Utah. I love how they push their players. Their players are... They're not always the most talented, but it seems to me like when it comes to at least college football, they're always the most prepared.
Whittingham, and they've had a factory of good defensive backs, whether it's Julian Blackman in 2020 or Clark Phillips a few years ago. Vaughn had 5 deflections on the year, but he had 3 of those 5 in the final 2 games against Iowa State and Central Florida. He had a deflection against TCU in their 13-7 loss. played really well in that game, but TCU just outscored Utah. His first deflection came against Utah State in a blowout win, but they gave up 21 points to Utah State.
And Vaughn is one of those guys I think is going to go under the radar.
He is.
He's going to be
Because his floor grade's a 57, his ceiling's an 87, and I'll admit his floor grade might be too low. His floor, you can argue his floor grade should be higher than the Florida corner, and it should be higher than the Georgia corner. You can argue that. That argument has a ton of merit.
Definitely argue that. Because I can say he is going to be a starting nickelback in the NFL. Not dime, maybe not boundary, but he's going to be the nickel guy that he's going to always be prepared. He's going to come, stop the run. And if you need to put him against the tight end, he's going to hit that tight end coming off the line simply because he can. And those guys are always valuable. And he's going to be a 5th, 6th round pick. And he is always going to be prepared, and he's always going to be hard-nosed because his coaches, to William's point, make him.
Another corner that might be a steal on day 3 is Minnesota's Justin Wally. I have a floor grade of 56 on Wally, but a ceiling of 86, which is 1 point higher than Cameron Mitchell's grade, which was an 85. But here's the thing with Wally that stands out. Senior Bowl invite, 5'11", 195, 10 deflections, 2 interceptions, and a pick 6. Anybody who has 10 deflections is a consistent cover corner. So let's look at the body of work. He missed 2 games with an injury against Iowa and Michigan, and Minnesota surrendered 27 points in each of those losses. He had a deflection against Rhode Island. He had 4 deflections against the USC Trojans. He's a big reason USC lost to Minnesota. Wally. Justin Wally. That's Wally with a Y, not Wally with a hyphen and an E like the Pixar film. He had 3 deflections against Maryland. He had 1 against Illinois, and he had 1 against Wisconsin in their 24-7 win. So there's there's flashes with Wally. There's flashes where he shows he's the guy who can take over the game, but he hasn't shown that consistently yet. But there's flashes. Like, I'll admit, there are flashes with Wally.
Arguably, if you just put him in man coverage one-on-one, he is a first-round prospect. If you add everything else into him and say you got to do zone, you got to do this, you got to do that, he's a 5th or 6th round pick.
So you're basically saying Wally's an A+ in man, a C- in zone, and a D- in press. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah.
That's what I heard.
I mean, he is, when you put him in man,
We're not going to give him an F in any categories because he had 10 deflections, and that's impressive enough to where we can overlook the zone and press.
He has shown that he just shows a lack of understanding in zone, from what I've seen. So when you go one-on-one with somebody, his competitive nature comes out. And it's like, this dude ain't going to beat me, regardless of anything else. And he's a highly competitive individual, what I've seen. And the problem is, he doesn't do well, from what I've seen, with relying on others.
And this is the thing. I found a lot of good corners that have A+ grades in man coverage, but their zone, their hard hitting, their press, their run stuffing's not on par with their man. Juju Brents was a prime example of this 2 years ago. That's why he fell to the Colts in the 2nd round. He was great at Kansas State in man and press, but his zone, his hard hitting, a lot of things that his game needed work, and he had a season-ending injury this year. So, for the Colts. So,
I with this situation, I see it more of
Cam Taylor-Britt, I had an A+ on him in man too in his draft year out of Nebraska.
For me, I see him more as I do not trust the other people around me.
You put him on a man-heavy team like the Ravens, the Steelers, the Chiefs, he's going to be the steal of the draft. If he goes to a zone team like the Bills, he's going to be worse than Elam. He's going to be Kaiir Elam.
Not necessarily, because his thought process seems to be, I trust me over my teammates.
So if he goes to a zone-heavy team that has good players around him like the Bills, he can thrive with patience, but not right out of the gate.
Yeah, don't run out again because he's going to have his own habit of I have to do it and I have to do it by myself. Which is.
But if he goes to the Chargers, he's screwed unless the rookie corners give him the guidance he desperately needs. Because Chargers are zone heavy. Chargers are zone heavy like the Bills. Not trying to get into a rant. It's just I'm picking up patterns and tendencies from what I've seen.
That's what I heard was rant.
Say that about the Bills because they got the best defensive backfield in the NFL.
You want to give the Bills the benefit of the doubt, but they played like shit against Lamar Jackson. But maybe that's a testament to Lamar Jackson. Maybe that's a testament to Lamar and Henry. Maybe that says more about them than the Bills' defense. To be fair to you.
I'm thinking about the Chargers, but the Bills are very good. I was thinking about the Chargers, my bad. But the Bills are very good in that.
To be fair, the Bills' only terrible game was against the Ravens. That was like the only game where their secondary was horrible, and they've been okay or good the rest of the year.
They've been good the rest of the year, and as long as he has confidence in his teammates, he will be fine. But because he doesn't in college, that's where his draft stock's going to plummet.
All right. I got 2 fifth-round corners, but I'm going to have to take some notes.
William, I heard you say something. Do you want to elaborate?
What do you want to add with Wally? We got 2 more fifth-round corners, and I promise you I'm going to be taking notes and revising my cornerback rankings because from what Joey's telling me, I need to move Wally. I need to adjust Wally and Vaughn's floor grades and leave the other corners where I have them, Vaughn, Everett, and Marshall. That's the feedback I'm getting from Joey, and I'm trying to process all the feedback without overdoing everything. So, what do you want to add before I get to these last 2 guys? All right, I'll get to the last 2 guys, William. At 150, we have Keontae Scott, corner Auburn. I've got the same potential grade on Scott that I had on Mitchell, but his floor is much lower than Mitchell's. But it's Auburn. Auburn is a cornerback factory in recent years. Look at what they did in the past few drafts. I think Auburn had a corner drafted. They had Pritchett this year. They had last year they had McCreary in 22, and Auburn's become a cornerback factory in recent years. And this year, it's Keontae Scott. I have him at 150 on my board. He's probably going to start out as quarter corner, but he has potential to develop into a boundary, but he's a long-term project. That's the verdict I've got with Scott, Joey. Going to start out as a number 5, but has enough potential to develop into a borderline number 2. But he's probably either going to be a dime or nickel at the NFL, just based off trajectory. What do you want to add to that, William?
Oh, I don't have much to add, dude.
It's round 5.
I've gotten that far. Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, he did play well against Milroe, and then Milroe got the redo. Milroe beat the crap out of him. I'm thinking of Milroe in 2023. He actually did a nice job against Milroe in 2023, but Alabama walloped Auburn this year. But he actually did well against Milroe in 23 after getting torched by him this year. What do you want to add to this guy, Keontae Scott, Joey?
I was actually looking forward to William talking about Keontae Scott against Alabama.
Yeah.
Oh, well, going against Milroe, it depends because, they're trying to get a grasp on him and that, trying different things against, different coverages is just one of those things that kind of goes out the window, with coaching. So.
Yep. Keontae Scott. Keontae Scott has experience on special teams. Not only is he the cover corner, he's the return specialist. He's been the return specialist on Auburn for 3 years in a row on punt returns. So there is some special teams value with Scott as well.
So I really think the big thing is when we're talking about these corners, especially the SEC corners, when Milroe's intelligence and athletic ability is more important than his lack of accuracy. And that's what has gotten me to really elevate him in this draft, is that these corners have a hard time adjusting to him because he's so freaking smart.
But here's the thing with Scott. Scott had 0 deflections. Scott had 0 deflections, but he was a punt returner for 3 years. So you're looking at a guy with the floor of a number 6, but the ceiling of a number 2 or 3, and that makes him a dime corner. Even if he reaches his ceiling, works his ass off, does everything right, that makes him a number 4 from a realistic trajectory. But it's the upside and the Auburn reputation that is going to get him drafted. I don't think Scott's going to go undrafted because those special teams guys, Joey, the corners that special teams experience bring value to a team, even if it's not the most conventional value. And Scott's one of those guys that...
I agree, but William, I want your opinion on my assessment of the situation within the SEC when it comes to Alabama.
Well, you're talking about, football smarts. You're talking about how smart Milroe is going against these corners in the SEC. And corners have quietly become, one of the most sought-after positions in the NFL. With that, you just got to add...
Yeah, they're in tier 2 of the positional value pyramid. Quarterback's at the top of the pyramid, but after that, you have left tackle, edge rusher, corner in tier 2, and then D tackle and receiver in tier 3. So corner, you can argue it's the most important position on defense, even over edge rusher now. But I still think edge rusher is more important because there's less edge rushers as far as the supply and demand goes. But the final corner on my rankings is Trey Amos. I have him at 157. His floor grade's an 80. His floor grade's a 55. Ceiling's an 85. Floor's way too low. Ceiling might be correct at 85, but the floor with Amos I put is way too low. 13 deflections. He only had 3 games where he failed to get a deflection. Middle Tennessee State, Georgia Southern, and Georgia. And Ole Miss beat Georgia. Carson Beck probably made sure not to throw it Amos's way. That's probably because Beck played like crap against Ole Miss to the point where you can't even sugarcoat it. How you can't even put a positive spin on Carson Beck's game against Ole Miss. You can't. You can try to put a spin on it. You can try to be objective. If you're a Georgia fan, I respect the fandom, but I mean, shit. Amos only had 3 games where he failed to get a deflection, and they were all against teams that probably avoided targeting him: Middle Tennessee, Georgia Southern, and Georgia. And even if
very clear, Carson Beck has fallen from potentially the number 1 overall pick last year to potentially a 3rd round pick this year.
I have him in round 3, but Amos is a 5th round guy, and Beck avoided him. So what does that say about Amos? That actually says a lot about his game. And look at some of the games he had. He had a deflection against Furman, deflection against Wake Forest. He had 3 deflections in the 2017 loss. He's not the reason Kentucky beat Ole Miss. He's the reason Ole Miss had a chance to beat Kentucky. A deflection against South Carolina. 3 deflections in the LSU loss. 1 deflection against Oklahoma. 1 deflection against Arkansas. 1 deflection against Florida. 1 deflection against Mississippi State. I'm not saying he's perfect, but the resume is good to where his floor might be higher than where I'm projecting it. It just feels like the verdict I have is I'm too low on Vaughn, I'm too low on Wally, and I'm too low on Amos, and everything else with my day 3 corners, whether it's Everett or Marshall, feels spot on. That's what I've gotten from Joey and William, but what do you think I need to add? Because that's the verdict I've gotten from you and William, which is appreciated because if I'm not doing my job, that affects the entire team. And my job's to make you two even better. It's the lead, but to elevate you guys as well. So, what am I missing with Amos here, William?
Well, that's the thing is how many corners are actually going to be drafted? I mean,
A lot. At
what's
least
the number?
25. There were 35
Yeah,
corners with
yeah.
draftable grades a year ago. It's not as deep, but it's not as deep, but it's another deep corner class where you can find starting corners in round 2 or 3. If Amos dominates his bowl game and then he dominates the combine, this is a guy who could easily move into round 4, maybe even creep into day 2. Because outside of Kobe Bryant and the other corner that we had in the third round, the other corner that we had in the third round is we have Dorian Strong in round 4, but the number 1 corner we have in round 3 is Wisconsin's Ricardo Hallman. He had a bad game versus Bama. If Amos has a good combine, Amos has the potential to jump. Amos could jump Hallman. Amos might have a higher floor than Hallman, but he doesn't have a higher ceiling than Hallman. That's the tricky thing with Amos. But his floor might be higher than Hallman's. That's what's tricky with this evaluation. Because I think his ceiling's a nickel corner, but he's uber consistent to the point where Lane Kiffin will sell you into picking him on day 2.
There are, I will say this, considering you said it's your job to make us better, and I meant for you, that makes me feel good.
All right. William, what do you want to add to Amos? Because we got a few round 6, round 7 guys. We do. William left. I don't know if he got bored or just stream disconnected. I'll message him and find out what's going on. But there's still a few round 5 and 6 guys. I don't know if his stream connected. All right. So I'm going to look at some of these corners. I'm trying to figure out if William's stream disconnected or if it's just a Wi-Fi issue on his end. I am. And I promise you guys we will get into the MLS mock, but give me a few minutes to scout some of these corners. Yeah.
Well, the whole thing was
because I want to look at some of the round 6, round 7 corners in my rankings and see if these are guys that I'm too low on that Joey's higher on, or if they're just journeymen or career backups. That's really all we're doing at this point. There's 6 guys left. First guy up is Brandon Adams. He's a corner at Central Florida. I have a round 6 grade on him, but I have him a backup. And that's my only round 6 corner. Then I have Tommy Hill, Nebraska. Jordan Oladokun from Bowling Green comes in at 22. Tony Grimes, the UNLV's 23. Mark Davis Jr. from Vanderbilt, 24. And rounding out the group, Devin Kirkwood from UCLA. That's the group, Joey. Am I too low on any of those guys that I mentioned? Or are those guys right about where they should be?
Put the names in order.
The names flew by in the news ticker. I'll look at the code. I'll look at the code on my site just to make things easier for you. So,
that was a lot of things like.
All right. So the only round 6 corners, Brandon Adams from Central Florida, and then there's a few round 7 guys after Adams. Tommy Hill, Nebraska. Jordan Oladokun, Bowling Green corner. Tony Grimes, UNLV corner. Mark Davis Jr., Vanderbilt corner. Kirkwood, UCLA corner. That's it. Those are the guys.
Adams and Oladokun are 2 guys I think that get for the 5th round. They are very talented. corners, but I think they're flying under the radar right now. Get the combine.
Because I view those guys as backups. Like, I think Adams, I don't think he has the ceiling to develop into a starter, but he's a very steady, reliable dime corner. If you put him on your team as a dime corner, he will dominate that role.
And Chris, what is a dime corner?
A dime corner's a number 4 corner in a 4 cornerback set. There's not a lot of teams that run dime anymore with the edge rushers and how the NFL's evolved, but in third and long passing situations, it's still used situationally. It's
like you said, as the NFL has evolved, and a lot of ways, nickel and dime are the same. And a lot of
but the only difference is nickel is 3 corner, dime is 4. That's the only distinction, but it's a big one.
But it is a big one, but it is one that I have for several years.
And a dime corner might only get 5 to 10 snaps a game, but they will thrive in those 5 to 10 snaps.
Yeah, that is a position that I thought nickel and dime coming together slowly. The slow coming together, but I felt it for a few years, and you have corrected me several times on this podcast about mixing the two. There's a reason I mix the two. Because I feel like here in a couple of years.
See, back in the day, they used to have quarter corners, but that's only in prevent situations now. At Hail Marys at the end of the day. The quarter cornerback literally gets one play, and that's if it's a Hail Mary at the end of the game. Otherwise, he's learning the playbook and trying to process everything in the cornerback room like a sponge.
Yeah, it's like there's not going to. You give it 3 years.
Like Chris Abrams-Drain, he was the quarter corner on Denver this year because they had so many guys. Surtain, Moss, Damari Mathis. McMillan began the season as a nickel, but then Mathis came back and they played him for a game or two. And then they put McMillan back at nickel. He had the pick 6 against the Browns. So I think McMillan's locked in at nickel. And I like Mathis, but our lads had him at like 6 or 7. And I disagree with that. I would put Mathis ahead of Levi Wallace. Levi Wallace, to me, is the 6th best corner on Denver. I think Mathis and Abrams-Drain are better than Wallace. And I think you're in agreement with me on that after watching the Browns-Broncos game. I think you're in agreement with me on that. And this is the thing with Abrams-Drain. He had potential to be a number 1 corner, but he played in the quarter role and he's being eased into things. His rookie year, because he's a 5th-round pick. He's being eased into things. Super slow, super steady.
But that said, even though I do agree with you, just watch it. Watch the trend. Nickel and dime will become the same.
I think we're going to see more. The value of dime corners is going to go up in the coming years. People really only value field, boundary, and nickel corners, which is a mistake, in my opinion, with the cornerback position on the positional value pyramid. I think dime corner, we're going to see more dime corner sets to counter passes because we already have the 2 safeties playing zone coverage and prevent 2 to prevent deep passes. I think we're going to see more dime corners to prevent the short and medium passes. That's going to be the new trend, I think, Joey. You hit it on the head. In the coming years, we're going to see more dime packages to prevent the short, medium pass, and then quarterbacks are going to have to recognize that and go back to the deep pass. That's how the deep pass is going to make its comeback. I agree. That's how the deep pass is going to make its comeback because everything's going to be more run heavy, and we're going to see dime corners to counter the short passes. That's going to be the new fad. And then once the dime corners take away the short pass, quarterbacks will go back to the deep ball. And they'll have to anticipate everything, you know? I agree. That's going to become the trend. What do you want to add to that, though?
Well, I really think it's already here in a lot of ways because we're looking at this and the fact that the cover 2 has made a comeback. Well, if cover 2 has made a comeback, that means the running game made a comeback, but at the same time, you have to account for the passing game because, let's face it, we got the Herbert, we got all these quarterbacks.
If you're running a dime, you know, there's people say there's only cover 1, cover. People say there's only cover 1 through cover 4 coverage shells. That's false. If your safeties are playing man and all 4 of your corners are playing man, that's cover 6. That's cover 5 or cover 6. If all 4 of your corners and both of your safeties are playing man, that's not cover 4. That's a cover 6 shell. And nobody talks about the cover 6 shell because it's such an under the radar thing. It's like a taboo thing in the NFL world.
Here's the thing. If you're looking at it from, okay, cover 2 is coming back. Okay, so you have to run the ball to force them into a cover 3. But you have to account for quarterbacks making adjustments and so on and so forth. Okay, you're looking at nickel and dime corners, and they're like, okay, you have to do both. So what you're looking at is a convergence in the nickel and dime position. So either or can happen in that situation. And you have to have corners at the nickel position that can also play dime, and players at the dime position that play nickel. Because the position has changed.
See, nickel and dime corners are both slot corners, but mainly nickel corners are the left slot corner and the dime corner is the right slot corner. But they're both inside corners. The role's interchangeable and you can swap guys in either role.
But, the
nickel gets more downs. The nickel gets more downs. The nickel now probably gets 15 to 20 downs. The dime corner probably only gets 5 to 10. That's the distinction.
Because the nickel can hit the run more often.
The nickel can blitz more frequently, whereas the dime is a situational. The dime is basically an insurance corner in a passing situation.
Yeah, a situational cover guy goes to the guy that can cover the front and blitz. And that's going to converge because you're not going to be able to, with the current trends, you're not going to be able to switch out the nickel guy with the corner with the dime guy and so on and so forth. But you're going to have a cover 2.
And how many teams have the personnel to run 4 corners this year? How many teams have the personnel to run dime? Just from the top of our head. We'll get into this, and then we'll get into the MLS mock because I have it scheduled for 12:15. The Steelers, the Ravens, the Browns, and then you look at the rest of the Texans. Texans have a good pass defense. They're in the top 10, and they have Okuda as their dime. So when Patir's healthy in the nickel, Okuda's the dime. So the Texans have the personnel to run dime. After the Texans, I think there's a big drop-off in the AFC South, and then I think you get into the Bills, because the Bills have Elam as their dime. The Bills have Elam as their dime, so I would count the Bills as a team that can run nickel. And I think you can make an argument for the Jets, because Isaiah Oliver's the backup corner and the backup safety on the Jets. So I would make the argument that the Jets can play dime. They're more of a traditional 43 defense, but they have the personnel to play dime if they want to. And the same can be said with Denver. The same can be said with Kansas City, and the same can be said with the Chargers. I think that's it. Those are the 9 teams in the AFC that can play dime. There's 9 AFC teams that can play dime, and I think we just named them all.
Chiefs can play dime or nickel, and they're going to be the prototype.
Yeah, because I named 9 teams. That you have the Chiefs, Chargers, Broncos in the AFC West. You have the Jets and Bills in the AFC East. You have the Texans in the South, and then you have the Ravens, Steelers, and the Browns. And the Bengals have the personnel to play dime when all their corners are healthy. The problem is Daxton Hill and DJ Reader both suffered season-ending injuries, so their top 3 corners are Cam Taylor-Britt, Mike Hilton, who's a nickel guy, has to move to the outside, and then Josh Hart, the rookie out of TCU. Those are their only corners, and there's no depth behind those 3, even if those 3 are all on their A game. And those 3 are not all on their A game this year because the Bengals have the worst pass defense. That's why I excluded the Bengals, but they'd be number 10 for me if we're ranking teams.
The Bengals defense just as a whole
and this is me being generous to the Bengals. This is me being generous to the Bengals.
I am not going to be generous to the the Bengals because the Bengals should be one of the top 2 teams in the AFC North, but their defense is arguably the worst in the NFL. I'm not just talking pass, I'm talking run. They are abominable. So there is going to be a firing of defense coordinators.
They have Hendrickson and the linebackers, Pratt and Wilson, and everybody else is underachieved. That's the reality.
Underachieved. You're being very kind.
Here's the thing. If the Bengals want to re-sign T. Higgins and Chase, they can, but they'd have to cut the following players. Sam Hubbard saves $9.6 million, Sheldon Rankins, Alex Kappa, and they would have to cut all 3 of those players to keep Chase and Higgins. And the reality is I think the Bengals are willing to do that. I mean, Kappa's the only one of those 3 you can make an argument for keeping, Joey. But you'd sacrifice him to keep Chase and Higgins with Burrow. That's the reality. It's not that he sucks. He's a sacrificial lamb if it means keeping Higgins and Chase.
I would just say he sucks. You know,
You think Kappa sucks? He was effective back in his rookie deal. Then he goes to Cincy, but he got overpaid after his rookie deal. That's the reality.
During his rookie deal. Yeah, he was great back then.
But
guess what? When you get overpaid and you get exposed, well, then there's a problem.
we've covered everything. We got to get into the MLS mock. I'm going to end this stream and text Danny, make sure he wants to join. And if he doesn't, we'll just jump into the MLS mock because that's scheduled for 12:15. So we had 25 listeners, 24 on X and 1 on Twitch. So thank you so much, guys. And we'll be back for the safety rankings next week. I have Xavier. I have the Notre Dame safety as the number 1 safety. The Notre Dame safety. I have. I moved Xavier Watts ahead of Malachi Starks. I think Watts can play both safety roles, and I think Starks is a pure free safety. But you and Wes have Starks ahead, and to be honest, I had Starks as my preseason number 1 safety, but I moved Watts ahead of him, and Bill Sparks had moved Watts ahead of. So the Watts versus Starks debate will be next week, and there's a few other safeties I really like in this class, but we'll get to that next Saturday.
I just want to make something. I don't think I've ever said it publicly on the podcast. When it comes to scouting, I don't think people realize I was a defensive coordinator. So when my offensive...
So Joey was a left tackle as a player, but then he became a defensive coordinator as a coach. That's why he knows the game so well.
I played both sides. And I had to learn the defensive side of the ball to call defenses. So, in a lot of ways, the only things that I really know, quarterback, offensive line, I can look at wide receivers well and hit. I know running back because I had to block for the damn thing that I made the offensive line calls. But at the same time, I had to learn to be a defensive coordinator. That's how I learned. That's how I know the team on defense. I didn't have a choice because if I didn't do it, I would have been out of my ass. I had to learn that. Unfortunately, I also had 12 concussions that are about to me.